I pulled into my parents' driveway that Thursday afternoon, the autumn leaves crunching beneath my tires as I parked behind Tyler's shiny new BMW. The familiar scent of roasted turkey and cinnamon rolls drifted from the house, bringing back memories of childhood Thanksgivings when I actually felt welcome. Walking through the front door, I greeted my relatives with forced smiles, noticing how conversations seemed to pause whenever I approached. When dinner was announced, I headed toward my usual spot at the dining room table, only to stop short. My chair was missing. Everyone else took their seats while I stood awkwardly by the kitchen doorway, confusion washing over me. Then Mom raised her wine glass high and declared loudly, "Let's toast to the only child who actually made us proud." The room erupted in applause as every head turned toward Tyler. The clapping seemed to echo forever in my ears as I stood there, invisible and humiliated. Tyler beamed with pride, soaking up the attention like he always had since we were kids. But this felt different, more calculated. The missing chair, the pointed toast, the way everyone avoided eye contact with me afterward. My stomach twisted as the realization hit me that this wasn't just favoritism anymore. This was deliberate cruelty. Mom's voice cut through the applause as she continued her speech. Tyler has shown us what real success looks like. A corner office, a six-figure salary, respect from his colleagues. He's everything we hoped for in a son. The words stung like physical blows, each one carefully chosen to highlight everything I apparently wasn't. I watched Tyler accept congratulations from our aunts and uncles, his chest puffed out with arrogance. Cousin Jennifer gushed about his recent promotion to senior manager at TechFlow Industries. Uncle Bill clapped him on the back, praising his business acumen. Even my shy cousin Emma managed to stammer out words of admiration. Meanwhile, I remained standing in the doorway, holding my purse like a shield against the emotional assault. 3 years of working at Harbor Light Homeless Services apparently meant nothing to them. The countless nights I'd spent helping families find emergency shelter, the grant proposals I'd written to secure funding for addiction recovery programs, the teenagers I'd guided away from life on the streets. None of it mattered because my paycheck was smaller than Tyler's. Dad caught my eye from across the room and gave me a look that was part pity, part disappointment. It was the same expression he'd worn at my college graduation when I announced my decision to pursue social work instead of business. The same look when I chose my modest apartment in the city's community service district over the suburban house he'd offered to help finance if I'd just reconsider my career path. The toast finally ended, but the damage was done. As everyone settled into their meals, chattering excitedly about Tyler's achievements, I felt completely erased from my own family's narrative. The woman who'd spent her adult life trying to make a difference in the world had been reduced to a cautionary tale of wasted potential. I took a shaky breath, knowing I had to say something or forever live with the regret of staying silent. The words came out steadier than I felt inside. "Thanks for finally saying it out loud." The room fell silent as I turned toward the front door, my heart pounding with a mixture of hurt and liberation. But as my hand reached for the doorknob, Dad's voice stopped me cold. "Wait," he called out, his tone carrying an edge I'd never heard before. "Tell them what you did." My hand froze on the doorknob as Dad's words hung in the air like a threat. The dining room had gone completely silent, the only sound coming from the grandfather clock in the hallway, ticking away the seconds of my confusion. I turned around slowly, searching Dad's face for some explanation, but finding only cold determination. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, but even as the question left my lips, I could see something darker happening here. The family members weren't looking confused by Dad's cryptic statement. Instead, they were watching me with a mixture of anticipation and what looked like prepared judgment. Mom set down her wine glass and stood up from Tyler's side, her expression shifting from celebratory to something much more sinister. "Oh, Haley," she said, shaking her head with mock disappointment. "Did you really think we wouldn't figure out what you've been trying to do?" The confusion must have shown clearly on my face because Tyler actually laughed out loud. "She has no idea we noticed she—" He looked around the table, enjoying some private joke that everyone else seemed to be in on except me. Aunt Patricia leaned forward in her chair, her voice dripping with false concern. "Honey, we understand that jealousy can make people do desperate things, but what you've been telling people about Tyler crosses a line." My stomach dropped. They were talking about the conversation I'd had with Tyler 3 weeks ago when I'd discovered those financial documents in his apartment. But how could they possibly know about that I'd been completely alone when I found those papers and I hadn't told a single soul except Tyler himself? "I don't know what you think you know," I started, but Mom cut me off with a sharp gesture. "Don't make this worse by lying, Haley. Tyler told us everything. How you went through his personal belongings when you were supposed to be helping him move. How you took pictures of private documents that you had no business looking at. How you tried to convince him that he'd done something wrong with his job." The room was spinning now. Tyler had twisted the entire story, making my discovery of his crimes sound like some kind of violation of his privacy. But worse than that, they were all believing him without question. Tyler stood up from his chair, putting on a performance of wounded innocence that was so convincing I almost doubted my own memory. "Haley, I know you're struggling with your career choices, but trying to sabotage mine isn't going to make you feel better about yourself." Sabotage. The word came out strangled. "Tyler, you know that's not what happened. You know what I actually found." But he was already shaking his head, his expression full of practiced hurt. "I've tried to be patient with you, Haley. I've tried to understand that seeing my success might be hard for you. But when you started making accusations about embezzlement and fraud, that's when it became impossible to ignore you." The family gasped collectively, their expressions shifting to horror, as if they were hearing about my accusations for the first time. But I could see in their faces that this entire scene had been rehearsed. They'd been planning this confrontation, waiting for the perfect moment to ambush me with their twisted version of events. Dad stepped closer to me, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he'd used when I was a child caught misbehaving. "Haley, these kinds of false accusations could destroy Tyler's reputation. They could ruin his career and his life. Do you understand how serious this is?" I looked around the room at the faces of people I'd known my entire life, searching for even one person who might be willing to hear my side of the story. But what I saw instead was a united front of disapproval and predetermined guilt. They'd already decided I was the villain in this narrative. "He showed us the documents you photographed." Mom continued, her voice getting stronger as she built momentum. "Financial reports from his company that you clearly didn't understand. You saw numbers and transactions that looked suspicious to someone without a business background, and instead of asking Tyler to explain them, you immediately assumed the worst." Tyler nodded sadly, playing his role perfectly. I tried to walk her through how corporate accounting works, how departmental budgets get transferred between accounts, but she was convinced she'd uncovered some kind of conspiracy. The manipulation was so complete, so perfectly orchestrated, that for a moment I questioned my own sanity. Had I misunderstood what I'd seen? Had my lack of business experience led me to jump to wrong conclusions? But then I remembered Marcus Thompson's face in the company photo Tyler had shown me weeks earlier, the family man who was being investigated for the very crimes Tyler had actually committed. The father of 3 who was facing prison time because my brother was letting him take the blame for embezzlement and fraud. "This isn't about jealousy," I said, finding my voice again. "This isn't about my career or my understanding of business. This is about right and wrong." Uncle Bill shook his head dismissively. "Haley, you work with homeless people and drug addicts. You see corruption and criminal behavior everywhere because that's your world. But you can't project that onto your brother's legitimate business success." The casual cruelty of his words hit me like a physical blow. They weren't just dismissing my concerns about Tyler's crimes. They were using my chosen profession, my dedication to helping society's most vulnerable, as evidence that my judgment was fundamentally flawed. Cousin Jennifer chimed in with practiced sympathy. "We're worried about you, Haley. This kind of paranoid thinking, these unfounded accusations against family members, it's not normal behavior." I realized then that they weren't just protecting Tyler. They were systematically destroying my credibility, making sure that anything I might say about his criminal activities would be dismissed as the delusions of an unstable woman who couldn't handle her brother's success. The trap was perfect, and I was standing right in the middle of it. Dad moved between me and the front door, his substantial frame blocking my escape route with deliberate precision. His expression had transformed from disappointment to something far more calculating, and I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized this confrontation was about to escalate beyond anything I could have imagined. "Before you storm out of here in one of your dramatic fits," he said, his voice carrying a coldness I'd never heard before, "there's something you need to understand about the consequences of your behavior." Mom rejoined the conversation from behind me, creating a sense of being surrounded that made my chest tighten with anxiety. "We've been hoping you'd come to your senses on your own, Haley, but clearly that's not going to happen." Tyler remained seated at the table, but his posture had changed. The wounded, innocent act was gone, replaced by something that looked almost predatory as he watched the scene unfold. Whatever was coming next, he was enjoying it. Dad reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick manila envelope that he'd obviously prepared in advance. "Your grandmother's inheritance," he announced, holding the envelope just out of my reach. $50,000 that was supposed to be split equally between you and Tyler. My heart stopped. Grandma Helen had died 6 months ago, leaving specific instructions in her will that her savings should be divided between her 2 grandchildren. I'd been expecting the paperwork to be finalized soon, planning to use my portion to finally get out of my cramped apartment and maybe even pursue the graduate degree in social work administration I'd been dreaming about. "Was supposed to be," I repeated, though I was already dreading the answer. Dad's smile was completely devoid of warmth. "After Tyler's promotion and your recent behavior, your mother and I made the difficult decision to petition the estate attorney for a modification. We convinced Judge Harrison that Tyler has demonstrated the responsibility and maturity to handle the full inheritance, while you've shown a concerning pattern of instability and poor judgment." The words hit me like a physical assault. They'd stolen my inheritance, the one thing Grandma Helen had specifically wanted me to have. The woman who'd always believed in my work, who'd told me countless times that helping others was the most noble calling in the world, would be horrified to know her own family had used her money to punish me for doing exactly that. "That's illegal," I managed to whisper, though my voice was shaking with shock and rage. "You can't just change someone's will because you don't approve of their career choices." Mom laughed, actually laughed at my protest. "Oh, sweetie, when you have the right connections and a legitimate concern about a beneficiary's mental stability, it's easier than you might think." Tyler finally spoke up from his position at the table, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "We have documentation of your erratic behavior, Haley. The accusations you've been making, your financial struggles, your inability to maintain stable relationships. Judge Harrison agreed that giving you access to that much money right now wouldn't be in your best interests." I stared at my brother, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in our lives. He wasn't just enjoying my humiliation, he was orchestrating it. Every word, every gesture was calculated to cause maximum psychological damage while maintaining his image as the concerned family member. But Dad wasn't finished. He held up the envelope again, this time with the air of someone offering a deal. "However, we're not unreasonable people. We understand that families sometimes go through difficult periods, and we believe in redemption." The word redemption coming from his mouth sounded like a threat. "Here's what's going to happen." Dad continued, his businessman persona taking over completely. "You're going to apologize to this entire family for the embarrassment and pain you've caused with your wild accusations. You're going to acknowledge that your jealousy of Tyler's success has clouded your judgment and made you say things that aren't true." Mom picked up where he left off, as if they'd rehearsed this script. "And you're going to make some real changes in your life. That nonprofit job that's obviously affecting your mental health needs to go. Tyler has connections at several respectable companies that would be willing to give you a chance in sales or marketing. Basically, real jobs." Aunt Patricia added helpfully from the dining room. Dad nodded approvingly. Do those things show us that you're committed to getting your life back on track, and we'll consider reversing our decision about the inheritance? Maybe not the full amount, but a portion that reflects your new level of maturity and responsibility. I looked around the room at my assembled family members, searching for any sign that someone else was as appalled by this manipulation as I was. But instead, I saw nods of agreement, expressions of satisfaction that they were finally helping me get my priorities straight. The cruelty was breathtaking in its completeness. They were demanding that I renounce everything I believed in, abandon the people I dedicated my life to helping, and publicly humiliate myself, all for the possibility of recovering some fraction of money that was rightfully mine in the first place. And if I refuse, I asked, though I was terrified to hear the answer. Tyler's smile was absolutely chilling. Then you leave here tonight with nothing, Haley. No inheritance, no family support, and no credibility when you try to spread your conspiracy theories about me to anyone who will listen. Dad nodded firmly. We've already contacted your supervisor at Harbor Light to express our concerns about your recent behavior. Dr. Martinez was very understanding when we explained that you've been under significant stress and might benefit from some time off to address your personal issues. The room seemed to tilt around me. They'd contacted my boss. They'd gone behind my back to my workplace, planting seeds of doubt about my mental stability and professional competence. The job I loved, the clients who depended on me, my entire professional reputation was being systematically destroyed. Choose wisely, Haley, Mom said softly. This is your last chance to be part of this family. The silence stretched on as I processed the impossible choice they were demanding I make. But before I could formulate any response, Aunt Patricia cleared her throat from the dining room with the air of someone who had more to add to the conversation. Actually, she said, standing up and smoothing down her dress with theatrical precision, I think Haley deserves to know exactly how the family feels about her choices before she makes her decision. Something in her tone made my blood run cold. This wasn't going to be another lecture about career responsibility or family loyalty. This was going to be something much worse. Patricia walked over to the coffee table and picked up her purse, extracting her phone, with the careful deliberation of someone who'd been planning this moment. You see, Haley, we've all been very concerned about you for quite some time. And in our concern, we've been discussing your situation rather extensively. She started scrolling through her phone, and I caught glimpses of what looked like text message threads with multiple participants. The blood drained from my face as I realized what she was about to show me. Here we go, Patricia said with false brightness. This is from our family group chat, the one you're not part of, obviously, since you're usually the topic of conversation. She began reading from her screen in a voice that was almost sing-song in its cruelty. From your cousin Brian last month. Haley's still playing Mother Teresa with the homeless people. When is she going to grow up and get a real job? 16 laughing emoji responses to that one. My legs felt weak. They had a family group chat that excluded me where they regularly mocked my life choices for entertainment. Patricia continued reading. From Uncle Bill, saw Haley at the grocery store today. Still driving that beat-up Honda and shopping with coupons. At 27 years old. Embarrassing. Your cousin Jennifer responded with, at least she's not asking us for money yet. Each word was like a knife twisting in my chest. These were people I'd grown up with, people I'd shared holidays and birthdays with, people I'd thought cared about me despite our differences. Oh, this one's particularly good, Patricia said, scrolling further. From Tyler himself. Haley tried to give me career advice today. A woman who makes $32,000 a year giving business advice to someone with a corner office. The delusion is real. That got 24 responses, mostly variations on delusional and out of touch with reality. I wanted to run to disappear, to wake up from this nightmare, but my feet seemed rooted to the floor. Tyler was watching my reaction with obvious satisfaction, not even pretending to be ashamed that his sister was learning about his betrayal in the cruelest way possible. Patricia wasn't finished. Here's a fun thread from last Christmas. The topic was Haley's dating life, or rather, the lack thereof. Cousin Emma wondered if you were secretly gay since you never bring anyone to family events. Tyler clarified that you're just too weird and intense about social justice for normal guys to handle. The humiliation was complete, but somehow Patricia found more ammunition. And my personal favorite, she continued, her voice getting more animated as she watched me crumble. From just last week when Tyler told us about your little visit to his apartment, Uncle Bill wrote, "Haley going through Tyler's private documents is typical. She's always been jealous and sneaky. Remember when we thought she stole money from Mom's purse in high school?" And Tyler responded, "She's desperate to find something wrong with my success because it highlights how badly she's failed at life." I found my voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "I never stole money from Mom's purse." Mom waved her hand dismissively. "The point isn't whether you actually took it, Haley. The point is that you've always had boundary issues and a problem with respecting other people's privacy." But the revelation about the group chat had broken something inside me. For years, I'd assumed that my family simply didn't understand my choices, but still loved me despite their disapproval. Now I knew the truth. They didn't just disapprove, they actively despised me. I was their shared joke, their cautionary tale, their example of everything not to become. Patricia held up her phone again. "Should I read the thread about your breakup with David? The family had some pretty interesting theories about why he left." "Stop," I said, but my voice had no strength behind it. Tyler leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed now that the psychological torture was in full swing. "David told me at the gym that you were too intense, too focused on other people's problems to pay attention to your own relationship. He said dating you was like dating a social worker who never went off duty." The casual cruelty of sharing my ex-boyfriend's private comments was so breathtaking that I couldn't even process it. My own brother was using my personal heartbreak as ammunition in this psychological warfare. Dad stepped closer to me, his voice taking on a patronizing tone that was somehow worse than outright hostility. "This is why we're trying to help you, Haley. This is why we're giving you this chance to turn your life around. The family has been watching you spiral for years, making one bad decision after another, and we can't enable it anymore." Mom nodded sympathetically. "Your obsession with helping strangers has cost you a normal life, normal relationships, normal success. We're staging an intervention before it's too late." I looked around the room at the faces of people who'd just spent 10 minutes systematically destroying every shred of self-worth I'd managed to build over the years. They weren't trying to help me. They were trying to break me down so completely that I'd accept any alternative they offered just to make the pain stop. And the most terrifying part was that I could feel it working. The doubt was creeping in the voice in my head, wondering if maybe they were right. Maybe I had made a mess of my life. Maybe my dedication to helping others really was just a cover for my inability to succeed in the real world. "So, what's it going to be, Haley?" Tyler asked, his voice cutting through my internal crisis. "Are you going to keep pretending that you're some kind of hero, or are you going to admit that you need our help to become a functioning adult?" I stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds, my mind reeling from the systematic destruction of every relationship I'd thought I could count on. The cruelty was so complete, so well orchestrated, that part of me was tempted to just surrender. To apologize for existing, quit my job, and let them remake me into whatever version of Haley would finally earn their approval. But as I opened my mouth to speak, something unexpected happened. Mom's composure cracked. "Just say you'll do it, Haley," she said, and her voice was higher than normal, almost frantic. "Say you'll apologize and change your career, and we can put all this behind us." There was something in her tone that didn't match the controlled cruelty of the previous few minutes, something desperate and frightened that made my instincts suddenly sharpen. I looked more closely at her face and saw what I'd missed. Before, she wasn't just angry or disappointed. She was terrified. Dad seemed to pick up on Mom's shift in energy and shot her a warning look, but it was too late. I'd noticed. "Why do you care so much about what I do with my career?" I asked, my voice steadying for the first time since this nightmare had begun. "Why does it matter to you whether I apologize or not?" Tyler shifted uncomfortably in his chair, and I saw him exchange a quick glance with Dad that was loaded with meaning. Something was happening here that went beyond family disapproval or even cruel entertainment at my expense. Mom's hands were actually shaking now. "Because you're family, Haley. Because we love you and we want what's best for you." But her words sounded hollow, like she was reading from a script she no longer believed. And suddenly, with a clarity that cut through all the emotional manipulation, I understood what was really happening. "You're not trying to help me," I said, my voice getting stronger. "You're trying to shut me up." The room went deadly silent. Tyler's face had gone pale, and Dad's jaw was clenched so tightly I could see the muscles working under his skin. "That's ridiculous," Patricia said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Why would we need to shut you up?" I looked directly at Tyler, and for the first time in the entire evening, he couldn't meet my eyes. "Because of what I know about your promotion." Mom actually gasped, her hand flying to her mouth like she'd been struck. Dad stepped forward aggressively, but I held my ground. "That's what this is really about, isn't it?" I continued, the pieces finally clicking into place. The missing chair, the public humiliation, the group chat, stealing my inheritance, threatening my job. "You're not trying to fix me. You're trying to destroy my credibility so that if I ever tell anyone what I found in Tyler's apartment, no one will believe me." Tyler finally found his voice, but it came out as a croak. "Haley, you don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" I turned to face the entire room, my fear transforming into righteous anger. "You've spent the last hour making sure everyone here thinks I'm jealous, delusional, and unstable. You've documented my supposed mental health issues and contacted my employer. You've isolated me from family support and made sure I'm financially vulnerable. That's not an intervention. That's a cover-up." Mom was hyperventilating now, her breath coming in short gasps. "Sandra, calm down," Dad said sharply, but his own voice was strained with panic. "What exactly did you find?" Haley, Aunt Patricia asked her earlier, cruelty replaced by genuine concern. But I could see in her face that she was beginning to understand that this wasn't just about sibling rivalry anymore. Tyler stood up so quickly that his chair nearly toppled over. "She doesn't know anything," he said desperately. "She saw some financial documents she didn't understand and jumped to crazy conclusions. That's all this is." But his panic was confirming everything I suspected. I looked around the room at my family members, seeing the dawning realization on their faces that whatever Tyler had done, it was serious enough to orchestrate this elaborate psychological assault on his own sister. "Tell them, Tyler," I said quietly. "Tell them what you did to get that promotion." "Nothing," he said, but his voice was shaking now. "I earned that promotion. I worked for it." I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. 3 weeks ago, when I'd found those documents at Tyler's apartment, I'd taken photos before he'd discovered me. I'd been so shocked by what I'd seen that I'd needed proof that I wasn't imagining things. Tyler's face went white when he saw my phone. "Haley, don't." But I was already scrolling through my photos, finding the images I'd hoped I'd never have to use. Bank account numbers, transfer authorizations, email communications with account codes that didn't match the official company records Tyler had shown me when I'd confronted him privately. $247,000. I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent room. Transferred from client escrow accounts into a personal account over the past 8 months, and someone else at your company is being blamed for it. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom sank into the nearest chair, her face completely drained of color. Dad stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Tyler made a desperate lunge for my phone, but I stepped back quickly. "His name is Marcus Thompson." I continued looking directly at Tyler, "the man who's going to prison for the crimes you committed." And that's when Tyler's carefully constructed facade finally collapsed completely. The room erupted in chaos as Tyler's composure shattered completely. He stood there, his hands shaking, looking between my phone and the horrified faces of our family members like a trapped animal searching for an escape route. "That's not what those documents show," he said desperately, but his voice had lost all conviction. "Haley, you're misinterpreting financial data that you don't understand." But Dad had gone completely silent, staring at Tyler with an expression I'd never seen before. It wasn't disappointment or anger. It was the look of a man watching his entire world collapse in real time. "Tyler," Dad said slowly, his voice barely audible. "Tell me she's wrong." The desperation in Tyler's eyes intensified. "Of course she's wrong, Dad. She's jealous and delusional. Remember, we've established that she can't be trusted." But even as he spoke, I could see him calculating, trying to figure out how much I actually knew and how much damage I could do. The problem was, I knew everything. Those 3 weeks since I discovered the truth had given me plenty of time to research Marcus Thompson and understand exactly what Tyler had done to him. Marcus Thompson is 43 years old. I said, my voice getting steadier as I watched Tyler's face grow more panicked. He has 3 children, Sarah, age 16, Michael, age 14, and little Emma, age 8. He's been with TechFlow Industries for 12 years, working his way up from junior accountant to department supervisor. He has an impeccable record, not a single disciplinary action in his entire career. Mom was staring at me now with an expression of growing horror. "How do you know all this?" Because when I confronted Tyler about the documents I'd found, he told me that Marcus was probably guilty of something anyway, and that guys like that always find a way to steal from their employers. I looked directly at Tyler. Guys like what Tyler's racism had always been subtle, hidden behind jokes and coded language. But in that moment of panic 3 weeks ago, his mask had slipped completely. He'd revealed exactly what he thought about his African-American colleague and why he'd found it so easy to frame him for crimes Tyler had committed himself. Aunt Patricia was shaking her head in disbelief. This can't be true. Tyler wouldn't do something like this. But I wasn't finished. The investigation started 6 months ago when a routine audit flagged unusual account activity. Marcus was the obvious suspect because he had access to the client accounts in question. Tyler made sure of that by recommending Marcus for expanded access privileges just weeks before he started stealing. Tyler tried one more desperate deflection. "Even if any of this were true, which it's not, how would you possibly know these details?" I looked at him with all the contempt I could muster. "Because I've spent the last 3 weeks researching everything I could find about the case. Public records, news articles, court filings. Did you know that Marcus's wife, Rebecca, had to take a second job cleaning offices at night because they can't afford a lawyer? Did you know that his oldest daughter, Sarah, had to quit the debate team because they can't pay for the travel expenses anymore?" The weight of what Tyler had done was settling over the room like a suffocating blanket. This wasn't just corporate embezzlement. This was the systematic destruction of an innocent family's life. Mom found her voice, though it came out as a whisper. "Tyler, please tell me this isn't true." But Tyler had moved past denial into damage control mode. "Okay," he said, his voice taking on a calculating tone. "Let's say hypothetically that there might be some irregularities in the account transfers. That doesn't prove anything except that the financial systems at my company need better oversight." Dad stepped forward, his business instincts finally kicking in. "Tyler, stop talking. Right now. If there's any truth to what Haley is saying, every word you say could be used against you." But I could see the gears turning in Tyler's head. He wasn't thinking about protecting himself legally. He was thinking about how to spin this situation to minimize the damage to his reputation and career. "The thing is," Tyler continued, ignoring Dad's warning, "even if someone at my company has been embezzling money, and even if the investigation has focused on the wrong person, that's not really my problem. I'm not responsible for the company's security failures or their choice of suspects." The callousness of his response was breathtaking. He was essentially admitting his guilt while simultaneously washing his hands of responsibility for the consequences. "Marcus Thompson is going to prison," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "An innocent man with 3 children is going to spend years behind bars because you stole money and let him take the blame. How can you stand there and say that's not your problem? Tyler shrugged, actually shrugged as if we were discussing a minor inconvenience rather than the destruction of a family. Look, if Marcus is really innocent, then his lawyer will figure out a way to prove it. That's how the system works. Uncle Bill, who had been silent throughout this exchange, finally spoke up. Tyler, what exactly are you saying? Are you admitting that you took money from your company? For a moment, Tyler seemed to consider continuing his denials, but then something shifted in his expression, and I saw a coldness there that I'd never noticed before. It was as if he'd decided that since his secret was out anyway, there was no point in pretending to be someone he wasn't. I'm saying that I saw an opportunity and I took it, he said with chilling matter-of-factness. I'm saying that in the corporate world, you have to be smart enough to get ahead before someone else does. And I'm saying that if Marcus Thompson wasn't sharp enough to protect himself, that's natural selection at work. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the grandfather clock seemed to have stopped ticking as we all processed what Tyler had just revealed about himself. Mom buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with what might have been sobs or might have been shock. Dad stood frozen, staring at his son like he was looking at a complete stranger. But Tyler wasn't finished. And I'm also saying that none of this matters unless someone decides to make it public, which brings us back to Haley's choice. He looked directly at me, and I saw something in his eyes that made my blood run cold. It wasn't panic anymore. It was calculation mixed with something that looked almost like threat. So here's the real question, sister, he said, his voice taking on a tone I'd never heard before. What are you going to do with what you think you know? Dad's business instincts suddenly kicked into overdrive, and I watched his expression shift from shock to the cold calculation that had made him successful in corporate America for over 30 years. He moved closer to Tyler, but instead of the confrontation, I expected he seemed to be entering problem-solving mode. Everyone needs to stop talking right now, Dad said firmly, his voice taking on the authoritative tone that had intimidated business rivals and employees for decades. Haley, put your phone away. Tyler, sit down and keep your mouth shut. But I kept my phone in my hand, sensing that whatever came next was going to be even worse than what I'd already experienced. Dad's shift from shocked father to strategic thinker was somehow more terrifying than Tyler's casual admission of guilt. Mom looked up from her hands, her face streaked with tears, but her expression hardening into something I'd never seen before. Robert, we have to think about this carefully. Our whole family is at risk here. Our family, I repeated, incredulous. An innocent man is going to prison, and you're worried about our family. Dad held up a hand to silence me, and for the first time in my adult life, I actually obeyed the gesture out of pure shock. Haley, you need to understand something about the real world. Tyler made some poor choices, yes, but destroying his life isn't going to help Marcus Thompson. The rationalization was so smooth, so practiced, that I realized Dad had been thinking about this possibility from the moment Tyler's guilt became obvious. He'd already moved past the emotional impact and into damage control mode. Think about this logically. Dad continued, his voice taking on the persuasive tone he'd perfected in boardroom negotiations. Tyler confesses now he goes to prison. His career is over, his life is ruined, and our entire family is disgraced. Marcus Thompson still serves time because the wheels of justice move slowly, and overturning a conviction takes years of appeals. Tyler was nodding along, his panic replaced by hope as he realized Dad was looking for a way to protect him. Mom wiped her eyes and stood up, her own corporate instincts apparently kicking in as well. But if we handle this quietly behind the scenes, we can find a way to help Marcus without destroying Tyler. I stared at them in disbelief. Handle this quietly, you mean cover it up? Dad's expression didn't change. I mean manage the situation in a way that minimizes harm to everyone involved, including you, Haley. The implied threat in those last words wasn't lost on me. Uncle Bill shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly out of his depth in this conversation, while Aunt Patricia looked like she was trying to process information that didn't fit her worldview. Here's what's going to happen. Dad said, reaching into his jacket pocket again. This time, he pulled out a different envelope thicker than the first one and clearly prepared in advance. We've anticipated that this conversation might go in this direction. My stomach dropped. They'd been planning for this possibility. The entire evening, the humiliation, the group chat revelation, all of it had been preparation for this moment. Dad opened the envelope and pulled out what looked like legal documents. This is a non-disclosure agreement drafted by our family attorney. It acknowledges that you may have concerns about Tyler's business practices, but it also recognizes that making unfounded accusations could harm both Tyler and the company he works for. I looked at the papers he was holding, seeing official letterhead and dense legal language that I couldn't fully understand, but I didn't need to understand every word to know what they were asking me to sign. "You want me to legally promise to stay silent about Tyler's crimes," I said. Mom stepped forward, her voice taking on a tone of reasonable negotiation. "We want you to agree to let us handle this through proper channels. Robert has contacts at TechFlow Industries. He can discreetly investigate the Marcus Thompson situation and ensure that justice is done without unnecessarily destroying Tyler's life." "Justice is done," I repeated. "Tyler stole almost $250,000 and framed an innocent man. What justice is there that doesn't involve Tyler facing consequences for his actions?" Tyler finally spoke up, his voice now carrying a note of self-righteous indignation that was absolutely stunning given what he'd just admitted. "Haley, I made some mistakes, but I can fix this. I can find a way to clear Marcus without admitting to anything that would destroy my career." The audacity was breathtaking. He wanted to play hero by clearing the man he'd framed while still protecting himself from the consequences of his crimes. Dad continued with his pitch. "Sign the NDA and we'll restore your full inheritance. In fact, we'll double it. $100,000, Haley. Enough to pay off your student loans, buy a house, or even go back to school for that advanced degree you've always talked about." The bribe was substantial enough to solve most of my immediate financial problems, but the price was my integrity and Marcus Thompson's freedom. And if I refused to sign, I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Dad's expression hardened. "Then you leave here tonight with nothing. No inheritance, no family support, and no credibility. We've already documented your unstable behavior and unfounded accusations against Tyler. If you try to go to authorities with your conspiracy theories, you'll find that your reputation has preceded you." Mom pulled out her own phone and showed me a screen I couldn't quite read from a distance. "Robert has already reached out to his contact at the FBI White-Collar Crime Division. He's expressed concern about a family member who seems to be experiencing some kind of breakdown and making wild accusations against successful relatives." The trap was perfect. They'd preemptively destroyed my credibility with law enforcement by portraying me as a mentally unstable woman making unfounded accusations out of jealousy and spite. Tyler leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed, now that he could see the family closing ranks to protect him. "It's actually kind of brilliant when you think about it, Haley. Either you take the money and everyone wins, or you try to be a hero and no one believes you anyway." Aunt Patricia, who had been silent throughout this exchange, finally found her voice. "Wait a minute. Are we really talking about bribing Haley to stay quiet about a crime? Are we really talking about letting an innocent man go to prison?" Dad turned to her with the same cold calculation he'd been directing at me. "Patricia, you need to think about your own family's interests here. Your son Derek works for one of my subsidiary companies. Your husband's construction business has several contracts with Robert Sterling Industries. This situation affects all of us." The threat was clear. Cross the family and there would be economic consequences for everyone involved. I looked around the room at the people I'd grown up with, searching for even one ally in this nightmare. But what I saw was a family that had just revealed its true nature. They were willing to sacrifice an innocent man's freedom to protect their own interests, and they were perfectly comfortable using blackmail and threats to ensure my compliance. The NDA sat on the coffee table between us like a contract with the devil himself. Before anyone could pressure me further about signing the legal documents, Tyler's phone buzzed loudly in the tense silence. He glanced at the screen and his face immediately lit up with a smile that made my skin crawl. "Perfect timing," he said, answering the call with obvious satisfaction. "Hey, Derek, how did it go?" I felt my blood freeze as I realized he was talking to Derek Martinez, Aunt Patricia's son, who worked for Dad's company. But more importantly, Derek was Tyler's college roommate and apparently still close enough to be involved in whatever was happening. Tyler put the call on speakerphone without asking anyone's permission, his confidence clearly restored now that he had what sounded like good news. "Dude, it's over." Derek's voice filled the room with barely contained excitement. "Marcus Thompson was arrested about 2 hours ago. The feds found the additional evidence we planted in his office computer, and his public defender is already talking about a plea deal." My legs nearly gave out. They'd planted more evidence against Marcus while I was sitting at this very table being psychologically tortured by my own family. Derek continued, oblivious to the horrified silence in the room. "The forensic accountants found the fake email trail you created showing Marcus communicating with offshore accounts, plus that falsified resignation letter where he admits to the embezzlement but claims it was for his daughter's medical expenses. Brilliant touch, by the way." Tyler's smile was absolutely predatory. I thought that would add just the right amount of sympathy while still making him look guilty. Jury will eat up the tragic father story but still convict him for theft. I stared at my brother in absolute horror. He hadn't just stolen money and let Marcus take the blame. He'd actively worked to frame an innocent man, creating false evidence and manipulating the investigation to ensure a conviction. "The best part," Derek continued, "is that Marcus actually did have some medical expenses for his daughter last year. Nothing major, just some orthodontic work, but it makes the forged confession look authentic. No one's going to dig deep enough to realize the amounts don't match." Aunt Patricia was staring at the phone in shock, probably processing the fact that her own son was involved in this criminal conspiracy. Uncle Bill had gone completely white, his mouth hanging open as he listened to Derek casually discuss framing an innocent man. But Tyler wasn't finished gloating. "What's the timeline looking like for trial?" "His lawyer's pushing for the plea deal," Derek replied. 15 years reduced to 8 if he admits guilt and agrees not to appeal. Word is that Marcus is seriously considering it because he can't afford a real defense attorney and he's terrified of getting the full sentence if he goes to trial. 8 years. An innocent man was about to accept 8 years in prison for crimes my brother had committed because he couldn't afford to fight a case that had been rigged against him from the start. Tyler actually laughed. Marcus Thompson, model citizen and family man brought down by his own noble desire to provide for his children. It's almost poetic. "Tyler," Dad said sharply, clearly uncomfortable with how much Derek was revealing over speakerphone in front of the family. But Tyler was too caught up in his victory to exercise caution. "The beautiful thing is that once Marcus takes the plea deal, the case is closed. No more investigation, no more forensic accounting, no more risk of anyone discovering the real source of the missing money." Derek's voice took on an even more celebratory tone. "And speaking of which, the final transfer went through this afternoon. The last of the money is now safely in the Cayman account, completely untraceable to either of us." My mind reeled. They were still actively stealing money while an innocent man sat in jail awaiting trial for their crimes. "How much total?" Tyler asked, as casually as if he were asking about the weather. "Just over 400,000 now," Derek replied proudly. "The beauty of having Marcus as the fall guy is that we can keep taking money right up until his trial, because everyone assumes he's been stealing for months anyway." $400,000. Tyler had let me believe the theft was limited to the $247,000 I'd seen evidence of, but they'd nearly doubled that amount while Marcus sat in jail. Mom was hyperventilating again, staring at the phone like it was a venomous snake. Even she seemed to be realizing that Tyler's crimes were far more extensive and calculated than she'd initially understood. Tyler noticed the family's horrified expressions and seemed to remember that he had an audience. "Derek, let me call you back later." "Wait." Derek said quickly. What about the Haley situation? Did she agree to keep quiet? Tyler's eyes met mine across the room, and I saw something there that made my blood run cold. It wasn't just arrogance anymore. It was genuine menace. We're still working on that, Tyler said slowly, but I'm confident we'll reach an understanding. Good, Derek replied. Because if she goes to the cops now, we're all screwed. The timing would look way too suspicious, especially if she has any of the original evidence. Tyler ended the call and slipped his phone back into his pocket, but the damage was done. Everyone in the room now understood that this wasn't just about corporate embezzlement. This was about an ongoing criminal enterprise that had deliberately destroyed an innocent man's life and was prepared to send him to prison to cover their tracks. You framed him, I whispered, my voice barely audible. You didn't just steal money. You actually framed Marcus Thompson with false evidence. Tyler's mask slipped, completely revealing something cold and calculating that I'd never seen before. I protected myself, he said with chilling matter-of-factness. In the business world, you either get ahead or you get left behind. Marcus was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Dad stepped forward, his face pale but his voice still controlled. Tyler, you need to stop talking. Immediately. But Tyler seemed to have passed the point of caring about consequences. Why Dad? Everyone in this room already knows the truth, and Haley's going to sign that NDA because she doesn't have any other choice. He looked directly at me with an expression that was unmistakably threatening. Because if she doesn't, I'll make sure that her life becomes even more miserable than it already is. I excused myself to use the bathroom, my hands shaking, as I stood up from my position near the front door. The family barely acknowledged my movement, too caught up in their own whispered conversations about damage control, to pay attention to where I was going. Once I reached the upstairs bathroom, I locked the door and immediately pulled out my phone with trembling fingers. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I'd saved 3 weeks ago, but hoped I'd never have to use. Detective Angela Morrison answered on the second ring. Haley, I was hoping you'd call back. How are you holding up? Her voice was kind but professional, exactly as I remembered from our initial meeting when I'd first brought Tyler's crimes to law enforcement attention. What my family didn't know was that I hadn't spent the last 3 weeks just researching Marcus Thompson's case. I'd been working directly with the FBI's white-collar crime division. Detective Morrison. I'm at my family's house, and Tyler just admitted everything. I whispered into the phone. He confessed to the embezzlement, and he revealed that there's been additional evidence planted against Marcus. They arrested Marcus tonight, based on forged documents. I could hear Angela's sharp intake of breath. Slow down, Haley. Tell me exactly what Tyler said. I quickly summarized the conversation, including Derek Martinez's involvement and the revelation that the thefts had continued even after Marcus's arrest. Angela listened without interruption, but I could hear her typing rapidly in the background. This is exactly what we needed, Angela said when I finished. Haley, are you in immediate danger? I don't think so, but Tyler threatened me directly, and my family is trying to make me sign a non-disclosure agreement to keep me quiet about everything. Angela was quiet for a moment, and I could hear muffled voices in the background as she apparently consulted with colleagues. Haley, I need you to listen carefully. We've been building a case against Tyler and his associates for weeks now, based on the initial evidence you provided. But we needed more proof of the conspiracy to frame Marcus. My heart was pounding so hard I was afraid someone downstairs might hear it. What kind of proof? The kind you're getting right now, Angela replied. Haley, you're wearing a recording device. I looked down at my outfit in confusion. I was wearing a simple blue sweater and black pants, nothing that could conceal any kind of electronic equipment. Angela seemed to sense my confusion. Remember the pendant necklace I gave you at our last meeting? The one I said was a good luck charm for your safety. My hand flew to my throat, touching the small silver pendant that Angela had insisted I wear whenever I might encounter Tyler. She'd said it would help her keep track of my well-being, but I'd assumed she was speaking metaphorically. It's been recording everything, Angela continued. Every word Tyler said, every admission of guilt, every threat against you. We have it all. The implications hit me like a physical blow. The FBI had been listening to my family's psychological torture session. Tyler's casual admissions of guilt and the family's conspiracy to cover up his crimes. "How long have you been listening?" I asked. "Since the moment you walked into that house," Angela replied. "We've been monitoring for your safety, but we never expected to get this level of incriminating evidence. Tyler's phone call with Derek Martinez was particularly valuable." I felt a surge of hope for the first time all evening. "Does this mean you can save Marcus?" "Marcus was released 20 minutes ago," Angela said, and I had to bite my lip to keep from crying with relief. "We intercepted him before he could sign any plea agreement. He's at the field office now, reuniting with his family and being briefed on the real situation." The bathroom seemed to spin around me. "He's free!" "Completely exonerated," Angela confirmed. "The charges were dropped the moment we verified that the additional evidence was fabricated. Tyler and Derek have no idea that we've been monitoring their communications and tracking their financial transactions." I sank down onto the edge of the bathtub, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening. "What happens now?" Angela's voice took on a more serious tone. "Now we need you to go back downstairs and continue the conversation with your family. We need them to keep talking, keep revealing details about the cover-up conspiracy. Can you do that?" The thought of facing Tyler again, knowing what he was capable of, made my stomach clench with fear. What if he gets suspicious? What if he realizes I'm working with you? "He won't," Angela assured me. "From his perspective, you're trapped with no way out. He has no reason to suspect that law enforcement is involved. Just keep him talking and try to get more details about how they plan to frame Marcus and cover up the financial crimes." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves for what was coming next. "How much longer do I have to stay here?" "Not much longer," Angela promised. "We're coordinating with local police right now. Officers will be at your location within the next 15 minutes. The relief was overwhelming, but it was mixed with a strange sadness. In the space of one evening, I'd lost my entire family, but gained the satisfaction of knowing that justice would be served. "Angela," I said before ending the call. "Yes." "Thank you for believing me when I first came to you. Thank you for taking this seriously, even when my own family thought I was delusional." Her voice was warm when she replied, "Haley, what you've done tonight has saved an innocent man's life and exposed a criminal conspiracy that could have destroyed multiple families. You should be proud of yourself." I ended the call and stared at myself in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me was someone I barely recognized. 3 weeks ago, I'd been desperate for my family's approval, willing to doubt my own perceptions to maintain their love. Tonight, I'd chosen justice over family loyalty, truth over comfort, and doing what was right over doing what was easy. It was time to go back downstairs and finish what we'd started. I walked back down the stairs with my phone in my pocket and my hand unconsciously touching the pendant at my throat. Knowing that Detective Morrison and her team were listening gave me a strength I hadn't felt all evening, but I still had to act like the trapped and desperate woman my family believed me to be. When I entered the living room, the family was huddled around the coffee table in intense conversation. The NDA documents were spread out and Dad was pointing to specific clauses while speaking in low, urgent tones. They looked up as I approached, their expressions expectant and predatory. "Have you made your decision, Haley?" Mom asked, her voice taking on the artificially sweet tone she'd always used when she wanted something from me. I took a deep breath and looked directly at Tyler, who was watching me with barely concealed impatience. "I want to know something first. I want to understand exactly what you did to Marcus Thompson." Tyler's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Why does it matter? The situation is what it is." "Because I need to understand what I'm agreeing to stay quiet about," I replied, hoping my voice sounded convincingly conflicted rather than secretly determined. Dad nodded approvingly. "That's reasonable, Haley. You should understand the full scope of what you're protecting." The irony of his words was lost on him, but I could practically feel Detective Morrison's attention sharpening through the hidden recording device. Tyler leaned back in his chair, his confidence fully restored now that he thought he had me cornered. Fine. You want the whole story? Marcus Thompson was the perfect fall guy from the moment I started planning this operation. Operation? Uncle Bill repeated, his voice weak with shock. Tyler shot him an irritated look. Jesus, Uncle Bill, try to keep up. You think I just stumbled into stealing $400,000? This took months of careful planning. I forced myself to look confused and desperate rather than triumphant. I thought you said it was just poor choices, mistakes you could fix. Tyler laughed, actually laughed. Haley, you're so naive, it's almost cute. I didn't make mistakes. I made strategic decisions. I identified a target, created an opportunity, and executed a plan. Mom was staring at her son like she was seeing him for the first time. Tyler, you're talking like a criminal. I'm talking like a successful businessman, Tyler corrected her sharply. The only difference between what I did and what happens in boardrooms every day is scale and paperwork. Dad cleared his throat uncomfortably. Son, maybe we should focus on solutions rather than details. But Tyler was on a roll now, clearly enjoying the opportunity to explain his cleverness to an audience he thought was powerless to stop him. Do you want to know the beautiful part about choosing Marcus? It wasn't just that he had access to the accounts. It was that he was the kind of person everyone would believe could steal money. What do you mean? I asked, though I was afraid I already knew. Tyler's smile was absolutely chilling. Come on, Haley. A 43-year-old black man with 3 kids and financial pressures. The investigators were practically looking for a reason to blame him before I even started planting evidence. Aunt Patricia gasped audibly. Tyler, that's horrible. That's realistic, Tyler shot back. I used the system's existing prejudices to my advantage. Marcus Thompson was always going to be the primary suspect once money started disappearing from accounts he managed. I felt physically sick listening to my brother casually discuss exploiting racial bias to frame an innocent man, but I forced myself to keep pushing for more information. But how did you actually frame him? I asked. How did you create evidence that made him look guilty? Tyler was clearly enjoying the opportunity to brag about his criminal ingenuity. It started small. I began transferring money from client accounts that Marcus had legitimate access to, but I made sure the digital trail pointed to his computer terminal. Then, I created fake emails from Marcus to offshore account managers discussing the transfers. Derek Martinez had been right about Tyler's attention to detail. Every aspect of the frame job had been carefully calculated to destroy Marcus's life while protecting Tyler. The medical expenses angle was Derek's idea, Tyler continued. We researched Marcus's family situation and discovered his daughter had needed some dental work last year. So we forged a letter where Marcus confessed to the embezzlement, but claimed he did it because he was desperate to pay for his child's medical treatment. Mom was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she listened to her son describe the systematic destruction of an innocent family. How could you do this to someone with children? Tyler shrugged with terrifying indifference. How could I not? Marcus Thompson's family problems aren't my responsibility. My responsibility is to myself and my own success. Success built on destroying other people's lives. I said, my voice shaking with rage. Success built on being smarter than other people, Tyler corrected. Marcus Thompson trusted a system that was designed to fail people like him. I just helped it along. Dad was shaking his head in disbelief. Tyler, this isn't business strategy. This is sociopathic behavior. Tyler's expression hardened. Don't lecture me about sociopathic behavior, Dad. You've spent 30 years climbing over competitors and exploiting workers to build your company. The only difference is that your methods are legal. The comparison was obviously painful for Dad, who'd always prided himself on his business ethics, despite his obvious ruthlessness in family matters. And what happens when Marcus refuses to take the plea deal? I asked. What if he insists on fighting the charges? Tyler's smile returned, but it was colder now. Then he goes to trial with a public defender against a prosecution team that has months of fabricated evidence and expert witnesses who'll testify about financial irregularities that I created specifically to implicate him. He'll be convicted, I said, though it wasn't really a question. He'll be destroyed, Tyler replied with satisfaction. 15 to 20 years in federal prison, his family financially ruined his children, growing up with a father they believe is a criminal. By the time he gets out, his life will be completely over. The casual cruelty was breathtaking, but I could see that even my family members were beginning to understand the true scope of what Tyler had done. And if I refused to sign the NDA, I asked, gesturing toward the legal documents on the coffee table. Tyler's expression shifted again, becoming openly threatening for the first time. Then I'll make sure your life becomes just as miserable as Marcus Thompson's was going to be. The mask was completely off now. Tyler wasn't just a thief or even just a man who'd made poor choices under pressure. He was someone who enjoyed causing pain and felt no remorse for destroying innocent lives. How? I asked, knowing that Detective Morrison needed to hear him spell out his threats. Tyler stood up, moving closer to me with deliberate intimidation. I have connections throughout this city's non-profit sector, Haley. One phone call from Dad to the right board members and your precious Harbor Light will suddenly discover that they can't afford to keep you on staff. Dad shifted uncomfortably but didn't contradict Tyler's claim. I can make sure you never work in social services again. Tyler continued, his voice getting louder and more aggressive. I can destroy your professional reputation the same way I destroyed Marcus Thompson's. By the time I'm done with you, no one will hire you for anything more challenging than serving coffee. Mom tried to interrupt. Tyler threatening your sister isn't necessary. But Tyler was beyond caring about family dynamics now. It's absolutely necessary, Mom. Haley needs to understand that crossing me has consequences, real consequences that will follow her for the rest of her life. He was close enough now that I could smell his cologne and see the cold calculation in his eyes. Sign the papers, Haley. Take the money. Keep your mouth shut. Or spend the next decade learning what it feels like to have your life systematically destroyed by someone with the power and connections to make it happen. The threat was clear, direct, and recorded. Detective Morrison had everything she needed. It was time for this nightmare to end. I looked Tyler directly in the eyes, feeling a surge of courage that came from knowing the truth was about to set everyone free. You know what, Tyler? I think I understand now. His smile widened clearly, interpreting my words as surrender. I knew you'd see reason eventually. You're not stupid, Haley, just idealistic. Mom wiped her eyes with obvious relief. This is the right choice, honey. We can put all this ugliness behind us and move forward as a family. I nodded slowly, reaching for the NDA documents on the coffee table. Tyler's satisfaction was palpable as he watched me pick up the papers, clearly believing he'd won another victory through intimidation and manipulation. The thing is, I said, still holding the documents, I did learn something important tonight. I learned that sometimes the people who claim to love you are actually your worst enemies. Tyler's expression shifted slightly, sensing that something wasn't quite right. Haley, just sign the papers so we can move on. I set the documents back down without signing them. I also learned that sometimes doing the right thing means losing everything you thought mattered to you. Dad stepped forward, his voice taking on a warning tone. Haley, don't make a decision you'll regret for the rest of your life. That's when we heard the sound of car doors slamming outside, followed by heavy footsteps on the front porch. Tyler's head snapped toward the window, his face going pale as he saw the flashing lights of multiple police vehicles in the driveway. What the hell? He whispered, moving toward the window to get a better look. The doorbell rang, followed immediately by a firm knock and a voice that carried clearly through the house. FBI, we have a warrant. The room erupted in chaos. Mom screamed, Dad started shouting questions that no one could answer, and Tyler spun around to stare at me with dawning horror. You called them, he said, his voice barely audible above the commotion. You actually called the police. I reached up and touched the pendant at my throat, making sure he could see the gesture. "Tyler, meet Detective Angela Morrison. She's been listening to every word you've said tonight." The front door opened and Detective Morrison entered with 4 other agents, all wearing FBI windbreakers and displaying their badges prominently. Angela's expression was professional, but I could see the satisfaction in her eyes as she took in the scene. "Tyler Sterling," she announced clearly, "you're under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice." Tyler tried to run toward the back door, but 2 agents were already positioned to cut off his escape route. He was tackled in the dining room, his face slamming into the same table where he'd been celebrated as the family success story just hours earlier. "You have the right to remain silent," Angela continued as the agents restrained Tyler with handcuffs. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Mom collapsed into a chair, hyperventilating as she watched her golden child being arrested in her own living room. Dad stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing as he tried to process the fact that his careful damage control strategy had failed spectacularly. "Derek Martinez is also in custody," Angela informed the room, along with several other individuals involved in this conspiracy. Tyler lifted his head from the table, blood trickling from his nose, his eyes filled with pure hatred as he looked at me. "You destroyed your own family, Haley. Was it worth it?" Before I could answer, another voice came from the front door. "It was worth everything." Marcus Thompson walked into the room, flanked by 2 more FBI agents, his wife Rebecca, and their 3 children close behind him. The man Tyler had tried to destroy was free, vindicated, and very much alive to see justice being served. Tyler's face went completely white when he saw Marcus. How is he here? He was supposed to be in jail. "Marcus Thompson was released 3 hours ago," Angela explained. "After we confirmed that all the evidence against him was fabricated, he's been completely exonerated." Marcus stepped forward, looking directly at Tyler with a mixture of anger and pity. "You tried to destroy my family to cover up your crimes. You were willing to let me spend decades in prison for something you did." Tyler tried to speak, but one of the agents pushed his face back down against the table. "Save it for your lawyer," the agent advised. Rebecca Thompson approached me with tears in her eyes. "Miss Sterling, I don't know how to thank you. Detective Morrison told us what you did, how you risked everything to save my husband." Their oldest daughter, Sarah, stepped forward as well. "My dad told us you have pictures and documents that proved he was innocent. You saved our whole family." The contrast between the Thompson family's genuine gratitude and my own family's horrified shock was stark and emotionally overwhelming. Angela gestured for the agents to remove Tyler from the house. As they dragged him toward the door, he managed to lift his head one more time. "This isn't over, Haley," he shouted, his voice filled with venom. "I'll make you pay for this." "Actually," Angela said calmly, "making threats against a federal witness is another felony charge we can add to your growing list." Tyler's final shouts were muffled as the agents forced him outside toward the waiting police cars. Through the front window, I could see neighbors gathering on their porches and lawns, drawn by the commotion and the flashing lights. Dad finally found his voice. "Detective Morrison. I think there's been a misunderstanding. My family had no knowledge of Tyler's alleged crimes." Angela pulled out her phone and played back a crystal-clear recording of Dad's voice from earlier in the evening. "Sign the NDA and we'll restore your full inheritance. In fact, we'll double it. $100,000, Haley." Dad's face crumpled as he realized the extent to which the evening's conversations had been documented. "Robert Sterling." Angela announced, "You're also under arrest for conspiracy to obstruct justice and attempted bribery of a federal witness." As the agents moved to arrest Dad, Mom started screaming again, but her cries were drowned out by the sound of more sirens approaching the house. As Dad was led away in handcuffs, Detective Morrison approached me with Marcus Thompson and his family. The chaos in the living room was beginning to settle, but the emotional intensity remained overwhelming. "Haley," Angela said gently, "I think you should hear Marcus's story directly from him." Marcus looked tired but relieved. The weight of months of false accusations finally lifted from his shoulders. His wife Rebecca held his arm supportively, while their 3 children stayed close, clearly reluctant to let their father out of their sight. When this whole nightmare started, Marcus began, his voice steady but emotional. I couldn't understand how anyone could believe I was capable of stealing money from client accounts. I've worked for TechFlow for 12 years. I've never even taken a sick day I didn't actually need. His daughter Sarah, who looked to be about 16, stepped forward. The investigators made Dad feel like he was crazy for claiming he was innocent. They had emails with his digital signature, bank records, computer logs, everything. But the worst part, Marcus continued, wasn't even the criminal charges. It was watching my family suffer while I was powerless to protect them. Rebecca's voice was thick with emotion as she spoke. Marcus couldn't find work once the investigation became public. Our savings were wiped out paying for legal fees, and we had to take second mortgages on the house just to survive. Their youngest daughter, Emma, who couldn't have been more than 8 years old, looked up at me with serious eyes. Mommy had to work at night cleaning buildings because nobody would hire Daddy. The impact of Tyler's crimes extended far beyond simple financial theft. He'd systematically destroyed a family's entire way of life, their reputation in the community, their children's sense of security. The false confession letter was particularly devastating, Marcus explained. Tyler had researched our family situation well enough to know that Emma had needed some dental work last year. When the investigators found a forged document claiming I'd stolen money to pay for medical expenses, it looked completely believable. Angela pulled out her phone and showed me screenshots of the fabricated evidence. Tyler's attention to detail was remarkable. He'd even forged medical bills that corresponded to real treatments, making the confession letter appear authentic to forensic accountants. Marcus's son, Michael, who appeared to be about 14, spoke up with obvious anger. The kids at school said Dad was a criminal. They said our family were thieves and liars. We almost lost the house, Rebecca added. We were 3 weeks away from foreclosure when Detective Morrison contacted us tonight. I felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of suffering Tyler had caused in his pursuit of stolen money and personal advancement. But I was also amazed by the strength this family had shown in the face of such systematic persecution. How did you keep believing in Marcus's innocence? I asked Rebecca, when all the evidence seemed to point to his guilt. Rebecca's answer was immediate and certain. Because I know my husband. Marcus Thompson has never stolen so much as a candy bar in his entire life. He returns extra change when cashiers make mistakes. He won't even take home office supplies from work. Marcus nodded gratefully at his wife's words. But believing in my innocence and proving it are 2 different things. If Detective Morrison hadn't contacted us tonight, I would have taken the plea deal tomorrow morning. Angela's expression was serious as she explained the timeline. Marcus was scheduled to accept 8 years in federal prison in exchange for admitting guilt to crimes he didn't commit. The fabricated evidence was so convincing that even his court-appointed attorney was recommending the plea bargain. Sarah Thompson looked at me with tears in her eyes. You saved my dad's life. If he'd gone to prison, our family would have been destroyed forever. Young Emma nodded solemnly. Daddy would have missed my whole childhood. Marcus stepped forward and extended his hand to me. Haley, I don't know how to thank someone for giving me back my freedom, my reputation, and my future with my children. I shook his hand, feeling the calluses from whatever manual labor he'd been forced to take when his career in corporate finance was destroyed by Tyler's lies. You don't need to thank me, I said, my voice shaky with emotion. Tyler's crimes weren't your fault, and exposing the truth was the only right thing to do. But Marcus shook his head. You risked everything to save a stranger's family. You chose to do the right thing even when it cost you your own family relationships. Rebecca stepped forward and embraced me, her voice breaking as she spoke. You're a hero, Haley. Our children will grow up knowing that sometimes people do the right thing even when it's hard. Detective Morrison cleared her throat gently. Actually, Marcus, there's something else Haley should know about what her courage has accomplished. Marcus smiled for the first time since I'd met him. The evidence you provided didn't just clear my name, Haley. It exposed a much larger financial crimes network that Tyler and Derek were involved in. Angela nodded. We've identified at least 6 other companies where similar embezzlement schemes were in progress. Tyler and Derek weren't just stealing from TechFlow Industries. They were running a sophisticated operation that targeted multiple corporations. The scope of the criminal enterprise was staggering. Tyler's casual admission of stealing $400,000 was just the tip of the iceberg. More importantly, Marcus continued, there were other employees at other companies who were being set up to take the blame for Tyler's associates' crimes. People with families, people with careers, people whose lives would have been destroyed just like mine almost was. Rebecca's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Because you found the courage to speak up, Haley, you didn't just save our family. You saved multiple families from the same nightmare we've been living. The weight of that revelation was almost too much to process. Tyler's crimes weren't an isolated incident or a moment of poor judgment under pressure. They were part of a calculated, ongoing conspiracy that would have destroyed numerous innocent lives if I hadn't found the strength to expose the truth. What happens now? I asked, looking between Marcus and Detective Morrison. Angela's smile was professionally satisfied. Now Tyler and his associates face federal charges that will likely result in decades in prison. Now Marcus gets his life back, and now you get to decide what comes next for yourself. Marcus stepped forward again, his expression serious but hopeful. Haley, I know this is probably not the time, but I want you to know that you'll always have a place at my consulting firm. Someone with your integrity and courage is exactly the kind of person I want to work with. The job offer was unexpected and generous, but more than that, it represented something I'd never had before: professional recognition from someone who valued my character rather than judging my choices. As I looked around the room at the Thompson family, I realized that while I'd lost the family I'd been born into, I'd gained something far more valuable: the knowledge that I was capable of doing the right thing even when it cost everything, and the respect of people whose opinions actually mattered. Detective Morrison approached me with another folder of documents that I hadn't seen before. Her expression was serious but carried a hint of satisfaction that suggested she had more good news to share. Haley, there's another aspect of this case that you need to understand, she said, opening the folder to reveal what looked like financial records and legal documents. Tyler's theft of your inheritance wasn't just morally wrong, it was also legally fraudulent. My confusion must have shown on my face because Angela immediately began explaining the details that the FBI's financial investigation had uncovered. When your father claimed that they'd petitioned for a modification of your grandmother's will, he was lying, Angela continued. What actually happened was much more sophisticated and much more criminal. She showed me photocopies of documents bearing Tyler's signature, alongside what were clearly forged versions of my own signature. Tyler created fraudulent paperwork claiming that you'd agreed to sign over your portion of the inheritance to him. The implications hit me like a physical blow. He forged my signature, multiple signatures across multiple documents, Angela confirmed. Bank authorizations, legal waivers, even a notarized statement claiming that you felt Tyler deserved the full inheritance because of his superior business acumen. Marcus Thompson stepped closer to look at the documents, his expression darkening as he recognized the sophisticated level of fraud involved. This is the same type of document forgery they used to frame me, he said. Tyler's been using these techniques for a long time. Angela nodded grimly. The investigation has revealed that Tyler's been forging signatures and creating false documents for at least 2 years. Your inheritance was just one of many fraudulent schemes he's been running. But she wasn't finished with her revelations. However, there's something else you should know about your grandmother's will, something your family apparently never told you. She pulled out what looked like an official legal document sealed with court stamps and bearing the signature of Helen Sterling, my grandmother. Your grandmother included a specific provision in her will that she never shared with her children. I took the document with shaking hands, scanning the dense legal language until Angela pointed to a particular section, highlighted in yellow. "Read that paragraph out loud," she instructed. I found my voice and began reading. "In the event that either grandchild is found to have defrauded, coerced, or otherwise illegally obtained the inheritance portion belonging to the other grandchild, the entirety of the inheritance shall be awarded to the wronged party, along with punitive damages equal to the original inheritance amount." My legs felt weak as the meaning of the legal language became clear. Grandma knew this might happen. Angela's expression was sympathetic but determined. Your grandmother was a very smart woman who'd observed her family's dynamics for many years. She specifically included this clause to protect whichever grandchild might be victimized by the other. Marcus was shaking his head in amazement. Your grandmother anticipated that Tyler might try to steal your inheritance, so she created a legal mechanism to punish him for it. The document in my hands represented so much more than financial protection. It was proof that my grandmother had understood the family dynamics that I'd been struggling with my entire adult life. She'd seen Tyler's character clearly and had taken steps to protect me from his manipulation. What does this mean in practical terms? I asked, though I was beginning to understand the answer. Angela pulled out a final document, this one, bearing recent court stamps and official seals. "It means that as of this afternoon, you are the sole beneficiary of Helen Sterling's entire estate. $50,000 in the original inheritance, plus $50,000 in punitive damages, plus accrued interest over the past 6 months. $106,000, I whispered, staring at the court order that made the judgment official. But Angela wasn't finished. There's also the matter of the stolen funds that Tyler had already transferred to his personal accounts using the forged documents. Those transfers are being reversed, and Tyler will be responsible for additional penalties and legal fees. Marcus's wife, Rebecca, stepped forward, her voice filled with wonder. Your grandmother protected you even after she was gone. I thought about the countless conversations I'd had with Grandma Helen about my work with homeless populations, about my commitment to helping people who couldn't help themselves. She'd always listened without judgment, always supported my choices even when the rest of the family disapproved. She believed in what I was doing. I said more to myself than to anyone else. She understood why my work mattered even when everyone else thought I was wasting my potential. Angela nodded. According to her attorney, Helen Sterling specifically mentioned your dedication to social justice work when she was drafting this clause. She wanted to make sure that if your family ever tried to punish you for your career choices, you'd have the financial independence to continue following your principles. The emotional impact was overwhelming. My grandmother had given me far more than money. She'd given me validation, protection, and the freedom to continue fighting for what I believed in without fear of financial manipulation from family members. There's one more thing, Angela said, her tone shifting to something more official. Because Tyler used fraudulent documents to steal your inheritance, and because that theft was connected to his other financial crimes, you're entitled to additional compensation from the Federal Restitution Fund. She handed me yet another document, this one, estimating the value of damages I'd suffered as a result of Tyler's criminal conspiracy. We estimate that Tyler's actions cost you approximately $25,000 in legal fees, lost opportunities, and emotional distress. That amount will be included in his restitution requirements. I stared at the number on the page, hardly able to process that my financial struggles were about to end completely. More than that, the money represented something I'd never had before: true independence from family manipulation and the freedom to make choices based on my values rather than my financial desperation. What about the house? I asked, thinking about my parents' expensive home and lifestyle that Tyler's phone call had revealed was funded by stolen money. Angela's expression was grimly satisfied. All assets purchased with proceeds from Tyler's criminal activities are subject to forfeiture. Your parents' house, cars, and other major purchases from the past 2 years will be seized and sold to provide restitution to Tyler's victims. The justice was comprehensive and devastating. The family members who had spent the evening humiliating me for my modest lifestyle were about to lose everything they'd gained through criminal activity. Marcus stepped forward again, his expression serious but hopeful. "Haley, that job offer I mentioned earlier. With your inheritance and the restitution money, you'll have the financial freedom to pursue whatever career path you want. But I hope you'll consider joining my consulting firm as a partner rather than just an employee." The offer was generous beyond anything I could have imagined. But more than that, it represented the respect and professional recognition that I'd never received from my own family. As I looked around the room at the faces of people who valued integrity over wealth and justice over family loyalty, I realized that losing my biological family had led to finding something far more valuable: a chosen family built on shared values and mutual respect. Over the following weeks, I watched from a distance as the full scope of the criminal investigation unfolded, and the consequences for my family became clear. Detective Morrison kept me informed of developments both as a witness in the federal case and as someone who deserved to understand the complete aftermath of the night that had changed everything. Tyler's arrest had been just the beginning. Within 48 hours, federal agents had executed search warrants on his apartment, his office, and my parents' house. What they found exceeded even the FBI's expectations for the scope of the criminal enterprise. Tyler kept meticulous records. Angela explained during one of our regular check-ins. He documented every fraudulent transaction, every forged document, every step of the conspiracy. It's like he was proud of his criminal achievements and wanted to preserve them for posterity. The evidence included detailed spreadsheets showing stolen funds from multiple companies, photographs of employees who were being set up as scapegoats, and even recordings of conversations where Tyler and Derek discussed their methods for framing innocent people. But the most damaging evidence was Tyler's personal journal, where he'd written extensively about his criminal philosophy and his enjoyment of destroying other people's lives. "Some of the entries are genuinely disturbing," Angela told me. Tyler wrote about Marcus Thompson's family in detail, describing how satisfying it was to watch them struggle financially while he lived off the money he'd stolen from Marcus's accounts. The journal also contained detailed plans for expanding the criminal operation to other cities, recruiting additional accomplices, and developing new methods for embezzling money while avoiding detection. Derek Martinez had attempted to cooperate with federal investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence, but his information only served to implicate additional conspirators and reveal even more extensive criminal activity. Derek's plea agreement led us to 5 other companies where similar schemes were in progress, Angela explained. "We've now identified 12 separate victims who were being framed for embezzlement they didn't commit. The network of corruption extended far beyond anything I could have imagined when I first discovered those documents in Tyler's apartment." My parents faced their own legal consequences as the investigation revealed their knowing participation in the cover-up conspiracy. Dad's business contacts, which he'd used to threaten my career and reputation, became evidence of his ability to obstruct justice and intimidate witnesses. Robert Sterling's phone records show extensive communications with corporate executives and law enforcement contacts, Angela informed me. "He was actively working to discredit your testimony and prevent you from cooperating with our investigation." Mom faced charges related to the inheritance fraud as her signature appeared on several documents, authorizing the transfer of funds that legally belonged to me. Her tearful claims of ignorance were contradicted by email evidence, showing her coordination with Tyler in planning the Thanksgiving confrontation. The financial consequences for my family were comprehensive and devastating. Federal asset forfeiture laws allowed investigators to seize anything purchased with proceeds from Tyler's criminal activities, which included virtually every major asset my parents had acquired in the previous 3 years. The house where I'd been humiliated and threatened was sold at auction to pay restitution to Tyler's victims. My parents' luxury cars, expensive furniture, and even Mom's jewelry collection were liquidated to fund the federal restitution program. Your parents will be left with basic transportation and a modest apartment, Angela explained. They're not going to be homeless, but their lifestyle of living off stolen money is definitely over. Tyler himself received a sentence of 12 years in federal prison, along with restitution requirements that would follow him for the rest of his life. Even after serving his sentence, he would be required to pay damages to his victims until the full amount was satisfied. Derek Martinez received 8 years, while several other conspirators received sentences ranging from 2 to 6 years, depending on their level of involvement. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of the legal consequences was the public nature of the criminal convictions. The local newspaper covered the case extensively, detailing how a successful businessman had systematically destroyed innocent families for personal gain. The same relatives who had participated in humiliating me at Thanksgiving dinner were now dealing with the social consequences of their association with federal criminals. Aunt Patricia lost her position on the hospital charity board when her involvement in the cover-up became public knowledge. Uncle Bill's construction business suffered significant losses as clients distanced themselves from the family scandal. The group chat where family members had mocked my life choices became evidence in the federal obstruction of justice case, as prosecutors used the messages to demonstrate the coordinated effort to discredit my testimony. The irony is remarkable. Detective Morrison observed during one of our conversations. They spent years mocking your modest lifestyle and career choices, but their pursuit of wealth and status led them to criminal activity that cost them everything. The family members who had dismissed my $32,000 salary as embarrassingly small were now facing bankruptcy, unemployment, and social ostracism. But beyond the legal and financial consequences, the most significant result was the complete dissolution of the family structure that had defined my entire life. The people who had demanded my loyalty and obedience were revealed to be criminals and conspirators who had never deserved either. "Have any of them attempted to contact you?" Angela asked during one of our final official meetings. I nodded sadly. Mom calls occasionally, usually crying and asking for money to help with legal fees. Tyler sent letters from prison claiming that I'm the real villain for destroying the family. "And how do you feel about those contacts?" I thought about the question for a moment before answering. I feel sad for the family we could have been if they'd chosen integrity over wealth, but I don't feel guilty about the consequences they're facing. They made their choices, and they're experiencing the results of those choices. The transformation in my own life had been just as dramatic, but in the opposite direction. The inheritance money had allowed me to move into a beautiful apartment and pursue the graduate degree in social work administration that I'd always dreamed about. More importantly, my partnership with Marcus Thompson's consulting firm had given me the opportunity to develop programs that helped other victims of white-collar crime navigate the legal system and rebuild their lives. Justice, I realized, doesn't always look like punishment. Sometimes it looks like people getting the opportunities to become who they were meant to be. 6 months after that devastating Thanksgiving dinner, I stood in the conference room of Thompson & Associates looking out at a group of clients whose lives had been forever changed by white-collar crime. The consulting firm that Marcus and I had built together had become something neither of us had initially envisioned: a comprehensive support system for families destroyed by financial fraud and corporate corruption. Today marks the launch of the Justice Recovery Program. I announced to the assembled group of victims, advocates, and legal professionals. This initiative will provide free legal support, financial counseling, and emotional resources to families who've been targeted by embezzlement and fraud schemes. The program was funded by a combination of federal grants, private donations, and my own inheritance money. What had started as my grandmother's $50,000 gift had grown into a $250,000 foundation dedicated to helping people like Marcus's family rebuild their lives after criminal victimization. Marcus stood beside me, his own transformation remarkable to witness. The man who'd been facing prison 6 months earlier was now a respected advocate for corporate accountability and criminal justice reform. Haley's courage didn't just save my family, he told the assembled group. It exposed a criminal network that was destroying families across 3 states. Today, 12 different families are free from false accusations, and the real criminals are serving prison sentences. In the audience, I could see Rebecca Thompson beaming with pride as her husband spoke. Their 3 children had returned to normal lives, with Sarah excelling in debate team competitions and Michael making honor roll for the first time since his father's ordeal began. Little Emma had started laughing again, the carefree joy of childhood restored now that her family was safe. The consulting firm had grown beyond our initial expectations. What had started as Marcus's small financial advisory business had evolved into a multifaceted organization that provided services to both corporations seeking to prevent fraud and individuals recovering from financial crimes. We've helped 43 families in the past 6 months. I continued reading from the quarterly report that still amazed me every time I looked at the numbers. We've recovered over $2 million in stolen assets, cleared the names of 18 wrongly accused individuals, and provided legal support that resulted in criminal convictions for 26 financial predators. The work was challenging but deeply fulfilling in ways that my previous job, as much as I'd loved it, had never been. At Harbor Light, I'd helped people manage the consequences of homelessness and addiction. Here I was, helping people prevent those consequences by addressing the corporate crimes that often led to family financial destruction. Dr. Martinez from Harbor Light had attended today's launch event, and she approached me afterward with obvious pride. "Haley, when your family contacted me with concerns about your mental health, I was worried about you. But watching what you've accomplished, I realized that your integrity was never a sign of instability. It was a sign of strength that I didn't fully understand at the time." The vindication was gratifying, but more important was the knowledge that my former colleagues now understood that standing up for justice wasn't a symptom of mental illness, even when it came with significant personal costs. The graduate program in social work administration that I'd enrolled in, using my inheritance money, was providing me with the theoretical framework to understand the systemic issues underlying individual cases of victimization. My professors often used our consulting firm as a case study in innovative approaches to social justice advocacy. "You've created something unique," Professor Williams had told me during a recent class discussion. "Most victim advocacy focuses on emotional support and immediate crisis intervention. Your model addresses the long-term systemic changes needed to prevent future victimization." The academic recognition was personally satisfying, but the real validation came from clients whose lives had been restored through our intervention. James Patterson, a 50-year-old accountant who'd been framed for embezzlement by his supervisor, stood up during the Q&A portion of today's presentation. "6 months ago, I was facing 15 years in prison for crimes I didn't commit. My wife was talking about divorce, my teenage son wouldn't speak to me, and I'd lost my house to legal fees." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "Today, the real criminals are in prison. I have my job back, my family is healed, and my son is proud to tell people that his father fought for justice. None of that would have happened without the Thompson & Associates Justice Recovery Program." Stories like James's had become routine, but they never failed to move me. Each successful case represented not just individual justice, but a family preserved, children protected, and faith in the system restored. The financial independence that came with my inheritance and the consulting firm's success had given me something I'd never experienced before: the freedom to make choices based entirely on my values rather than my financial needs. I'd been able to purchase a beautiful house in the neighborhood where I'd always dreamed of living, but more importantly, I'd been able to establish a scholarship fund for students from low-income families who wanted to pursue careers in social justice advocacy. The Haley Sterling Scholarship for Social Justice had awarded its first grants last month, providing full tuition support for 6 students who demonstrated both academic excellence and commitment to serving marginalized populations. The scholarship recipients had sent me thank you letters that I kept in a special folder in my office. One in particular from Maria Santos, a first-generation college student who wanted to become a civil rights attorney, had moved me to tears. "You've shown me that sometimes losing everything you thought you wanted is how you discover everything you actually needed." As the launch event concluded and people began to leave, Marcus approached me with an expression of serious gratitude. "Haley, I know we've talked about this before, but I need to say it again. You gave me my life back. You gave my children their father back. You gave my wife her husband back." His words were kind, but I'd come to understand that the gift had been mutual. "Marcus, you gave me the opportunity to discover what I was actually capable of accomplishing. You believed in my integrity when my own family didn't." Rebecca joined our conversation, her own transformation evident in the confidence and peace that radiated from her now. "Haley, the children ask about you constantly. They want to know if they can visit your new house, if they can help with the scholarship program, if there's any way they can give back to someone who saved their family." The idea of being a positive influence in the lives of children who'd experienced trauma and recovery was deeply appealing. I'd love to have them involved. Maybe they could help with our financial literacy workshops for teenage victims of family fraud. The suggestion sparked immediate enthusiasm from both Marcus and Rebecca. Their children's experience with false accusations and financial stress had given them insights that could help other young people navigate similar challenges. As I drove home that evening through neighborhoods I could now afford to live in, I reflected on the complete transformation my life had undergone. 6 months ago, I'd been a woman desperate for family approval, willing to doubt my own perceptions to maintain relationships with people who didn't respect me. Today I was financially independent, professionally successful, and surrounded by people who valued my character over my compliance. The house I pulled into was everything I'd ever dreamed of, spacious, comfortable, and filled with furniture I'd chosen myself rather than inheriting from family members who judged my choices. But more than the material improvements it represented, something profound, a life built on my own terms, funded by honest work, and dedicated to principles that I would never again compromise. Tomorrow, I would start working on our next major initiative, a lobbying effort to strengthen whistleblower protections for employees who expose corporate fraud. The legislation would be named the Marcus Thompson Whistleblower Protection Act, ensuring that future victims would have legal safeguards when they chose to do the right thing. The work would be challenging, potentially controversial, and definitely outside my comfort zone. But as I'd learned 6 months ago, some of the most important decisions we make are the ones that require us to risk everything we think we want in order to gain everything we actually need. 1 year after that life-changing Thanksgiving dinner, I stood in my own dining room preparing to host my first annual Justice and Gratitude celebration. The table was set for 12 people representing the new family I'd chosen based on shared values rather than shared DNA. Marcus and Rebecca Thompson would be there with their 3 children along with Detective Angela Morrison, Dr. Martinez, from Harbor Light, 2 scholarship recipients from my foundation, and James Patterson with his son, who'd reconciled with him after his name was cleared. The final guest was Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman whose retirement savings had been stolen by financial advisors who were now serving prison sentences thanks to evidence our consulting firm had helped gather. As I arranged the centerpiece of autumn flowers, I reflected on how different this Thanksgiving would be from the nightmare I'd experienced exactly 1 year earlier. Instead of being excluded from my family's table, I was creating my own tradition of celebrating with people who understood that gratitude meant more than acknowledging personal blessings. It meant actively working to ensure that others could experience those same blessings. The doorbell rang and I opened it to find Sarah Thompson holding a beautiful homemade pie, her younger siblings Michael and Emma bouncing excitedly behind her. "Ms. Sterling." Sarah said with the formal politeness of a teenager trying to make a good impression. "I made this apple pie using my great-grandmother's recipe. I wanted to contribute something special to thank you for everything you've done for our family." The gesture was so thoughtful and mature that I felt tears welling up in my eyes. The 17-year-old had learned lessons about gratitude and reciprocity that many adults never mastered. "Sarah, this is beautiful," I said, accepting the pie and gesturing for the family to come inside. "And please call me Haley. You're not just guests here, you're family." Marcus and Rebecca followed their children into my home, both of them looking around with obvious appreciation at the space I'd created. The house wasn't ostentatious or expensive, but it was filled with items that reflected my values: artwork from local homeless shelters, bookshelves filled with social justice literature, and photographs of the families our consulting firm had helped restore. "Haley, this is exactly what I imagined your home would look like," Rebecca said warmly. "It feels like you welcoming, purposeful, and filled with reminders of the work that matters to you." Detective Morrison arrived next, bringing her partner Sarah and their 2 adopted children. Angela had become not just a professional colleague, but a genuine friend whose own commitment to justice had inspired my continued advocacy work. "How's the lobbying effort going?" Angela asked as she handed me a bottle of wine. "Any progress on the whistleblower protection legislation?" I smiled, thinking about the meeting I'd had with Senator Williams' office just last week. "Better than I expected. 3 senators have already signed on as co-sponsors, and we have testimony scheduled from 4 families who've been helped by stronger whistleblower protections." The legislative work had been a natural evolution of our consulting firm's mission. Helping individual families recover from financial crimes was important, but changing the systems that allowed those crimes to occur would help prevent future victimization on a much larger scale. Dr. Martinez arrived with Maria Santos, the scholarship recipient, who was now in her 2nd year of law school and volunteering with our Justice Recovery Program during her breaks. Maria's transformation from first-generation college student to confident advocate was one of the success stories that reminded me why the foundation mattered so much. "Haley," Maria said, embracing me warmly, "I have news about the internship program. The civil rights organization in Washington wants to create a permanent position for scholarship recipients to work on financial crimes legislation." The expansion of opportunities for young advocates was exactly what I'd hoped for when establishing the scholarship program. Each recipient was building on the foundation we'd provided to create their own paths towards social justice work. James Patterson and his son David were the last to arrive, both of them looking healthier and happier than I'd ever seen them. The restoration of James's reputation and the healing of his relationship with his son had been one of the most emotionally satisfying cases our firm had handled. "David got accepted to college," James announced proudly. "He wants to study forensic accounting so he can help catch financial criminals." The 17-year-old's career choice was a direct result of his father's experience. But instead of being motivated by anger or revenge, David was inspired by the possibility of preventing other families from experiencing what his had endured. As we gathered around the dinner table, I looked at the faces of people who'd become my chosen family over the past year. Each person represented a different aspect of the journey that had brought me to this moment: Marcus's courage in the face of false accusations, Angela's professional commitment to justice, Dr. Martinez's willingness to admit her initial misjudgment, Maria's determination to overcome systemic obstacles, James's resilience in rebuilding his life, and David's transformation of trauma into purpose. "Before we eat," I said, raising my glass of sparkling cider, "I want to share something I've learned this year about gratitude and justice." The room fell silent as everyone turned their attention to me, their faces reflecting the kind of respect and affection I'd never received from my biological family. A year ago, I thought I knew what family meant. I thought it was about blood relationships and unconditional loyalty, about accepting whatever treatment you received from people who were supposed to love you. I thought that belonging somewhere meant conforming to other people's expectations of who you should be. I paused, looking around the table at people who'd taught me a completely different definition of family and belonging. What I've learned is that real family consists of people who see your value even when it's inconvenient for them, who support your principles even when it costs them something, and who celebrate your courage even when it challenges their own comfort. Sarah Thompson was nodding thoughtfully, clearly understanding the distinction between inherited relationships and chosen ones. I've also learned that gratitude isn't just about appreciating what you have. It's about using what you have to make sure other people can experience the same blessings. It's about transforming your own good fortune into opportunities for others who are still struggling. Marcus raised his own glass, his voice thick with emotion. Haley, you've taught all of us that sometimes losing everything you thought you wanted is the only way to discover everything you actually needed. And, Rebecca added, you've shown us that the people who try to diminish your light are usually afraid of how brightly you're capable of shining. As we shared the meal that evening, the conversation flowed between personal updates, professional achievements, and dreams for the future. Sarah Thompson talked about her plans to study criminal justice, while Michael shared his idea for a youth program that would teach financial literacy to prevent future victimization. Little Emma, now 9 years old and completely recovered from the trauma of her father's false accusations, announced that she wanted to be just like Miss Haley when she grew up helping families who were in trouble. Dr. Martinez shared news about policy changes at Harbor Light that had been inspired by my advocacy work creating better support systems for clients who were victims of financial crimes in addition to homelessness. Detective Morrison talked about the federal task force she'd been asked to join, focusing specifically on financial crimes that targeted working-class families and communities of color. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Marcus lingered behind to help with cleanup and to have a private conversation. "Haley," he said as we loaded dishes into the dishwasher, "I need you to know something. The person you became this year isn't someone who emerged because of the crisis you faced. That person was always there. The crisis just gave her permission to come forward." His words resonated deeply with something I'd been thinking about recently. I think you're right. I think I spent so many years trying to earn approval from people who were never going to value what I had to offer that I forgot what I was actually capable of accomplishing. "And now?" Marcus asked with a knowing smile. I looked around the kitchen of my own home filled with evidence of the life I'd built based on my own values and supported by people who genuinely respected me. Now I know that the right people will appreciate your light without requiring you to dim it for their comfort. And I know that the most important approval you can ever receive is your own. As Marcus and his family said their final goodbyes, I stood in my doorway watching their car pull away, reflecting on the complete transformation my life had undergone. A year ago, I'd been a woman so desperate for family acceptance that I'd been willing to doubt my own moral clarity. Tonight, I was a financially independent advocate whose work had helped dozens of families and whose example had inspired young people to pursue careers in social justice. The difference wasn't just in my external circumstances. The difference was in my understanding of my own worth and my willingness to build a life that reflected my actual values rather than other people's expectations. Before closing the door, I took one last look at the neighborhood that had once seemed impossibly beyond my reach. Now it was simply home, a place I'd earned through honest work surrounded by people I'd chosen based on character rather than obligation. Tomorrow I would continue the work of helping families recover from financial victimization. I would mentor scholarship recipients who were building their own paths toward advocacy. I would lobby for legislative changes that would protect future whistleblowers and strengthen penalties for white-collar criminals. But tonight I was simply grateful. Grateful for the grandmother who'd protected me even after death. Grateful for the courage I'd found when everything was on the line. Grateful for the family I'd chosen and who had chosen me in return. Most of all, I was grateful for the lesson that had changed everything. Sometimes the people who hurt you most deeply are inadvertently guiding you toward your greatest purpose, and sometimes losing everything you thought you needed is the only way to discover everything you were meant to become. The real success in life isn't measured by the approval of people who don't understand your worth. It's measured by the positive impact you have on people whose lives are made better because you chose courage over comfort, justice, over convenience and integrity, over acceptance. As I turned off the lights and headed upstairs to my own bedroom in my own house, I realized that I'd finally found what I'd been searching for my entire adult life, a place where I belonged completely, exactly as I was. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what you knew was right? Have you experienced a situation where standing up for justice cost you relationships with people you loved? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking this video to help others find it. And if you believe in the importance of standing up for what's right even when it's difficult, please subscribe to hear more stories about courage, justice, and finding the strength to do the right thing. Finally, please share this story with someone who might need to hear that their worth isn't determined by other people's approval, and that sometimes the most important family is the one you choose for yourself. Thank you for listening to Haley's journey, and remember, your integrity is worth more than anyone's approval, and the people who truly belong in your life will celebrate your courage, not punish you for it. Until next time, may you always have the strength to choose what's right over what's easy.